Welcome to Burn Rate and Beyond. We are working on episode number 3, Strategic Budgeting for Business and Growth. I'm Chad Foles, and here we are with Jeff Mazza. So today we got some stuff to talk about, which is about a budget. I feel like a lot of people talk about budgets, thing that everyone's heard of, but I don't know if everyone actually knows what a budget is. So I guess, Jeff, how you doing today? Let's start with that.
Doing pretty well. Thank you. How about you?
Excellent. Monday, but hey, what are you gonna do? Keep going. So, what's a budget? Let's start there.
Yeah, I think that's starting from that. That question in itself is a good question because I think some people might not know what it is. But essentially, to me, that budget is essentially that financial, call it game plan, right? This is the roadmap that you would like to do. It kind of tells the money is supposed to go somewhere, one of these buckets, instead of saying where is it, where did it go, right? This is like the static, what we are tended to do. This is what pretty much I like to say a roadmap for next year's performance in the business.
Yeah, it's funny. I looked it up in the dictionary because I was like, whenever this topic came up, I'm like, I don't even know what this is, right? I mean, I know what it is, but I don't someone who doesn't actually have one or hasn't gone through the process. They're like, well, I think I know what it is. So I looked up in the dictionary and it said, it's a plan for the coordination of resources and expenditures of the amount of money available for, required for, or assigned to particular purposes. That's very wordy, right?
Yeah.
But I've also heard it called in layman's terms, giving every dollar a job. So it's like the idea. So I think the idea is like what you said is just like the financial plan for the year. So I think the important word there is plan, right? So it's like this is the idea of where we want to go, right? Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I mean, it's what we're call it planning on doing, and usually this is done the year prior to the actual budget year that you're filling out. So in this case, if we're working on 2025, we're saying this is what we want to do 2026 for next year. How we're going to allocate all the departments and the money and the revenue, all that. It gives us our foundation for where we want to go.
Yeah. Well, so the other thing that I've heard people talk about is a projection, and I sometimes that question comes up is like, is a budget a projection? Yes, I guess, because it's forward looking. Is there a difference in your mind between a financial projection and a budget?
Yeah, and that's a great question because I think sometimes it gets used interchangeably. But for me, that budget is really it's static, right? This is what we want to do. This is our game plan for the next year. Where the forecast is and the projection, right, is something that you would use that can be changed, right? The budget you shouldn't touch, you shouldn't change. It's in concrete, but that forecast should be used to, especially as you are in that current year, things might change, right? You might have some, better information at that time. Things go in your favor. Well, let's do a projection to determine what that outcome be, and vice versa. Things aren't going as planned. Let's do a projection, and essentially you can kind of compare them both. Budget to projection and actuals, all that. But so to me, the budget is the game plan that shouldn't be touched. The projections are something that you can touch as much as you want based off of the current information.
So that's great. That makes sense. But what's the power? Like, why? I mean, okay, like business is always dynamic. Things are always changing. Customers are coming, customers are going, laws are changing. It's always a dynamic environment, right? So what's the power of keeping something static, right? Because in the end, it's like 6 months in, whatever we thought was going to happen 6 months ago, well, that's almost ancient history sometimes, right? So how do you see the power of keeping it fixed?
Well, from the budget, I think is, because it is what the intentions are for that next year, saying, as of this point in time, we intend to do this for this next year, right? And there's a lot of variables, right? You're predicting that future, which no one really can. But you essentially what you're trying to do is saying this is our, call it foundation, this is our roadmap, and it's all based off of that information. But there's a lot of variables that do take place throughout that year. Like you mentioned, there could be some sort of laws that were passed or some sort of, a vendor might go away, or you might get some, favorable variables that improve your performance that you did not intend to. And that's where you can use a projection versus that budget to do, like to say, even just scenario planning, right? Best, base, worst case. And you have the more information when you start looking at that, the better it is to make good business decisions.
Okay. So business decisions. That's the ultimate goal here, right? Because then it's like, okay, we're making a decision based on so so I can see in the scenario that that you do a budget and you're like, okay, this is a big amazing plan for the year, and you get 6 months in, and then things change, and you need to make a decision, and there's a situation where the actual situation is different from your budget. How does that, like, what's the scenario where you've been in where that's helped someone make a decision? Like,
Um,
like I mean, I can understand, like, you make a great plan because no one's gonna make a bad plan. Let me just rephrase this, right? Because no one's gonna make a bad plan. Everyone makes good plans, right?
yeah.
So you get a few months in, and the reality is different than the plan. How does the budget help you make a decision?
Well, I think it in a couple different ways. I mean, I think when you use that budget along with a projection, right? You have I like to say your actuals, your budget, and your forecast, your projection. And you kind of look at all three, right? And like you said, things will change, right? Almost like expect the unexpected. And there are variables and bad variables. And those bad variables could affect the business and the path of that business in that year, negatively. So it's good to have all three saying this is our intended plan. This is some of the variables that have arose that we might need to pivot, whether that's a good pivot or bad pivot. But it might help uncover, we were supposed to do X amount in revenue, but things are going very well right now that maybe we do need to increase some of that spend that you said we're only going to do a certain amount, and vice versa, where, if revenues are really declining, then we might have to cut back even more than what our budget tells us. So it kind of allows you to look at all three to make those decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like there's also this situation that I think of with triggers, where it's like, okay, in a very simplistic scenario, it'd be like we bring on one more client, and that one more client, adds $1,000 a month to the bottom line. Okay, well then when we have that extra $1,000, we can afford this new 500 or 800 or $1,000 expense, right? So that's a very simplistic scenario. Obviously, a business with lots of customers, there's going to be lots of different comings and goings. The trigger might be a little bit different than just one extra customer, but the idea is that you hit a certain point in the budget, you projected it to be June, but in reality, maybe that happens in May, or maybe it happens in August, or maybe it never happens because you can't quite get there. But that's also another piece where it's like, by projecting the budget, creating the budget, you can say, okay, well, we think this is going to happen then we can make the next move, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Excellent. Okay. Let's see, the other thing I was thinking about here. Oh, the other thing is, so yeah, this little show we're doing here is called Burn Rate and Beyond. So burn rate and budget, are they the same thing? They related? They different? How do you put that together in your mind?
Sure. I mean, I like to think as when you're talking about burn rate, versus a budget. I mean, to me, that burn rate is really just the amount of spend, like the speed that you're spending that cash, right? And then the budget will help really control, call it the pace of that, right? So you kind of have that burn rate of just how much you're spending, how much of that cash that you're actually burning, whether it's the weekly burn, the monthly burn is more common, and then the budget really can help control that. So you can kind of say, here's what we're spending. We wanted to spend this from our budget, so that you can help make those milestones, to say either we stop spending based off of that budget or cut back, or we're not nearly spending enough based off of our budget, so we might have to increase the gas there. So that's how I would relate both of those.
Okay, awesome. So I guess the burn is a little bit like the bottom side of the budget. There's two sides, right? Like there's the cash coming in, which and then there's the cash going out. So the burn is burning the dollars, using them. All right. So the next the concept here is like you got to make a budget, right? And I think lots of people get stuck in this in the budget making process. So, I mean, I guess, do you have like a concept of like the normal like steps? Like, can you break it into like one, two, three easy high level steps?
Yeah, and that is, I feel like people get held up a lot too on just that, right? Okay, I would like to have a budget. I don't have one yet. Cool, but where do I start, right? And that's where I think it could get, some folks kind of held up. But for me, I mean, if your business has been around, 1, 2, 3, 4 years, it's a lot easier to use, past performance, right? Looking at, the financials from previous years to see any sort of, growth rates. And there's many factors that could go into it, but you could at the very least just start looking at your past performance and really identify if there are any growth rates, relative to revenue, and then you can kind of make those projections for next year. And then there might be some variables that, as a CEO or leadership, are aware of, saying, "Oh, we're going to sign on this one client that's going to boost revenue," things like that. All of those variables should be looked at. Then you can start looking at any sort of, call it, company initiatives that might be around the corner that you're working on, any sort of market trends, kind of those macroeconomic environment there that might be beneficial to your business or might hurt the business. But those all should feed into that budget.
Oh, yeah. So let's see here. I've also heard two different concepts. I've heard people talk about a budget like a bottom up budget and a top down budget. So I understand like the bottom up budget is like, okay, well, we need three people on the team, and each person's salary is going to be, X. And so, that, three times X is how much we're going to spend on payroll. And you do that for all the things, and it just adds up. And then from the bottom, you end up at the top where you have, the top line revenue, the top line expenses. And then obviously the inverse would be the top down, where you say, okay, well, globally, we're going to make, Y amount of revenue this month, and we want to spend 50% of that on wages, and 20% of that on IT and infrastructure and what have you. And then the limiting factor is set from the top, where you have a percentage from the top. So so I guess, do you have like a feeling of which one's easier, or which one people prefer, or which one works better?
And that is a great question, because I've done both. But just personally, I tend to find that the top down might be a little, I would say, easier. And I say that because, especially if you're looking at past performance, right? You can kind of see either some sort of customer base. You can kind of look at some sort of growth rates, when you start looking at previous financials. And even if, let's say, there are growth rates and there's no new revenue coming in, but you have these, call it, you can almost predict some high level of what that revenue is, but also looking at the expenses that are associated with that, expenses relative to revenue, to give you a good understanding of what you should be spending based off of revenue. The bottom up, it's still very a good method. I just personally like top down, because it just helps for, starting from the top and then, working down through the expenses, looking at expenses that are relative to revenue, so that, for instance, if you're spending, making numbers up, but 10% is on, wages, then you know that if revenue is going to increase by, X amount of percent, is that, you should be in line. You might need to hire some more people for that, and those are discussions that need to take place with leadership.
Interesting. Yeah. So you bring up the idea of the discussion. So in some ways, it's like, I think that's almost like a concept that's going to come up, that comes up more than once. Is that building the budget is a discussion, right?
Hmm.
It's a discussion. It's a process to say, okay, well, we either going to base this on past performance, or if it's a brand new operation, what we believe is going to happen, and that's a discussion about what needs to happen. But then once the budget is actually being used and compared to actual financial results, there's another discussion. So it's almost like it seems like it's part a communication exercise and part a financial exercise, which is it's just
Yeah.
kind of leads me to the other concept of like, is it more about thinking about the budget? Like, what's the budget mindset, I guess? Because I think people get stuck here. Like, oh, I don't have a budget because I don't want to feel limited. Like, um, so I don't know. Do you have like I have some ideas, some options about what the budget might be. Do you have like like do you have any thoughts about that limitation idea?
Well, I think yeah, some folks they put like a budget together. They might think like this is what we should be doing, right? Almost like it constrains their growth, I guess, right? I mean, outperforming your budget is not a bad thing, right? I think the mindset is it is a communication. To me, there's multiple people. It's not just a one conversation and done. I mean, I think the budgeting process usually starts in, some people in August, September, October, and with the hopes of having it completed by year end. But in those discussions, you might, depending on the company size, but you might have, multiple departments that, you have a sales department, you have an operations department, right? What are those key drivers and variables that are needed? If we were to achieve X amount in revenue, what are those key pieces, right? And it's not so much everything what they say goes, but it just opens the door to have that conversation to really kind of fine tune what are those inputs for that budget. So, but to me, it's a communication piece, but it shouldn't be any sort of constraints, which I think some people that I've talked to really they might look at that and say this is what we're supposed to do and that's it. But no, I mean if you're outperforming your budget in a good way, like that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, that's but I often heard that there's that concept of setting smart goals, like something you can measure, and there's nothing wrong with setting reasonable goals and then trying to crushing them rather than setting super high goals and never realizing them. But then so you mentioned you kind of start at the top and you get multiple people involved in various departments. Like how far down do you need to go? Like do you need to go down to like every single expense, like all the way down to like how much does your fax machine cost or whatever it is? Who uses fax machines? I don't even know where that came from. Maybe it's because I had to fax the IRS today anyway. But
Possibly.
but yeah, like how far down do you need to go? Is it just like you just stay at the C-suite, like just the major people involved, or is there other is there a sweet spot?
I mean I think it varies, I think, between company sizes, right? I mean if there's many different departments, right? I mean, I've probably involved the department leaders of some sort. If it's a smaller organization, even just starting with the leadership team, right? Whether that's just the CEO or the COO and your finance head there, but it could just having those discussions. But are you going down to see how many pencils you're buying? Like it may not. I mean, like I said, depends on the size of that organization, but. I mean, if you're plowing through pencils there and the spend's going up, like there might be worth looking into. But at the high level, it's really just trying to work your way down. But if it's going to move the needle per se, to me it just starts with leadership, and if it's a big organization, bring in the department heads to get their input, right? Because they might have good variable information that is needed to help with that budget, right? Instead of someone in the back just kind of looking at numbers and putting it together without having the real insights that some of these department heads might have.
And I guess it also can like the other thing to take a little bit of fear away from this process is also can be leaned into, where the first year maybe that you start with a budget, it's just the thing that moves the needle the most. Is that development? Is that sales? Whatever the biggest cost and the biggest variable that you have, that is the person or the team that should be most involved in the budget, because it's the one that actually makes the biggest difference. Like you said, the pencils are not going to move the needle on most companies, but payroll will move the needle on most companies. So yeah, that's a good one. So the other thing I was thinking about, like there's like these like different concepts of like, I think there's also the concept of like people don't want to look at the budget because they're afraid of saying, oh damn, oh shit, like I'm out of budget. Like what, I don't, oh no, the sky is falling. I'm going to get 50 lashes or who knows, right? And other people might be like, why am I out of budget? Or other people are like, I don't care about a budget because I'm building cool stuff. And other people might be like, that it, now I don't want to live within its constraints. Or some people might like living within the constraints, So I guess, I don't know, do you see any problems with those mindsets, or like?
Well, and those are some really good examples, Chad, because I've come across some folks that are just like that, right? But to me, I'm the opposite, right? Instead of saying like, I don't want to look at in case I'm out of the budget, but it's more of why am I out of budget? What is happening? Like, and it may not be in a bad way because you might realize after just having discussions and kind of opening the door a little bit to understand why, you might understand, hey, we were way off in the beginning when we were doing the budgeting process. Like we might uncover some sort of variables that we didn't really think of that is driving those costs up. Or maybe there's just an overspend that you say, all right, maybe we should slow down because of this reason. But to me, it's not so much don't be afraid, but more of why. And it kind of helps uncover that to make those smarter decisions.
Good stuff. So, the other thing that I've heard some people confuse sometimes is a KPI, like a key performance indicator, and a budget. Like, are those different, or are they the same, or how do they interact if they're not the same?
Yeah, the to me the budget, we call it the financial plan, and that's just the high level roadmap, right? Across the organization, starting from your revenue down to operating expenses and net income of the goal of what you're trying to do. And the KPIs to me are those, what they stand for, those key performance indicators, right? And those are kind of measuring some of the performance, right? And I think having 3 to 5 really important KPIs are important to look at, but it's not so much the budget to show across the entire kind of financial statement. But I wouldn't say let's have one or the other, but I think having both and then using them together is really good and powerful when you start looking at those together.
So I've heard, yeah, I think that the theory at least is that the KPI is something that's happening today that will tell you tomorrow if you're on track or not. Is at least the theory.
And even
The
on top of that too, and really quick, Chad, is like even
yeah,
just experience with KPIs is a lot of times not having like lagging, right, but more leading, right? And some of these KPIs, and even just having some experience of and they vary between organizations, but having good, KPIs and it could be operational between, for staff even, right? It's not so much like, what's our bank balance look like every day for a KPI, but how many phone calls is one person doing that will help drive performance, right? Like those are some really good KPIs too. So they're more leading than lacking, I should say.
yeah, definitely the bank balance is a lagging
Mhm.
KPI. So some other benefits I've heard that can be realized through using the budgeting process are building a cash reserve, like just like some like financial resilience benefits. It helps you build a cash reserve, review debt management strategies, and also diversify revenue streams. So I think the first two are pretty apparent. Like, okay, we make this plan and plan goes right, we're going to have this nice little nest egg that we can then go, implement and either pay out to shareholders or and start an initiative or what have you. And then the second one of reviewing the debt management strategy is kind of like you can also see how at what points you need to be relieving the debt or paying the debt, and then if that as that evolves with changing interest rates or additional investments, then that can be foreseen with the budget. But the third one, which I thought was interesting, that you brought up when we put this together, was the diversify revenue stream. So I didn't know if you had any ideas about how the budget really kind of interplays with the revenue stream conversation.
Well, I think, and it goes down to like you hear that term, KYC, right? Know your client, but also like know your suppliers and your customers, right? And that's both from the vendor side and the client side. And I say that because when you start to put that budget together, right, you're predicting to say, hey, I think we're going to do X amount. We'd like to do this performance next year, and it's based off of something, whether it's the data from the past, using those current clients, right? But do you really know that client? Like, are they going through any sort of issues? Like, what happens if they go away, right? What happens if they run into some sort of, call it security breach, and they're forced to close the door? Like, what happens to your revenue? Like, that could have a major impact on your business and the performance of it. So, to me, it's really just having some idea, you know, whether that's the sales team and having those conversations with the clients and how are things going type of thing. But to me, it's just having the more understanding of that, the better. And that goes the same for vendors too. If you have a certain product that you're producing and supplies that come in from a vendor, and if they go away, are you able to sustain and equally match that same level of quality without big price increases per se? So it's really just those thoughts and having those what if scenarios or plan B's and plan C's should be just having those discussions as part of that budgeting process. It makes you more aware of what could happen.
Oh, I see. So you're kind of thinking like, if we're going to project out our revenue and we have let's just say we have a couple of large clients, and we realize and that becomes apparent when you're doing the budgeting process, because if you do like a history of the client, and then you do the Pareto principle, you can bring the top ones, the biggest players to the top, and then the risk that's involved, or the risk that the inherent risk of having those so much revenue in a certain group of clients will start the conversation and say, well, hey, this is a problem. What do we do about it? And kind of bring up the ideas that different things need to be done. Excellent. Well, good stuff. I guess any other parting thoughts as we wrap things up here?
No, I mean, this is such a good topic for any business, any industry, and I think Chad and I were chuckling a little earlier, but I think just having any sort of budget, whether it's good or bad, is better than zero budget. So you can always evolve and grow from there, but just having some roadmap in place is better than nothing. So I would start sooner than later.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, just as a parting thought, because I think there's a bunch of tools out there that the tools are getting better with the evolving technology of online accounting and other platforms that link to it, that make this process significantly easier. And so basically, one idea is just, if setting a budget can be done in a snap with very little effort, what's holding you back from doing that today? So, parting thought. Thanks again, Jeff. We will talk to you again soon.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, appreciate it.